The Midnight Sundial, by Bruce Sabritsky, for Adele. Preface. I have never been good with dates. Recalling exactly when significant events happened in my life normally requires me to cross-reference other public events that happened roughly around the same time. Accordingly then, the global pandemic, which struck in 2020, resulted in a number of national and regional lockdowns. It was around the time of the second lockdown, or shortly before it, something very frightening started happening to me. With this historical event firmly etched permanently into the public record, I am going to estimate that sometime around May 2020, as I lay on my couch trying to watch a classic episode of Star Trek during a late winter evening, I found myself filled with a sense of deep existential dread. For whatever the reason, I was suddenly compelled to cover my right eye, and at that moment my life changed forever. The diagnosis of glaucoma was not exactly something new. Nearly 8 years prior, I had decided to visit a Specsavers outlet to get some custom reading glasses. This would be the first time in my life I had ever felt the need for assisted vision, as up until this moment, I had always enjoyed excellent eyesight. The sales assistant conducted some standard eye tests which revealed disturbingly high eye pressures, and as a result, I was referred to a specialist. After a year or so of appointments, my generally negative reaction to this particular doctor was enough to convince me I was going to be completely okay. After all, other than needing reading glasses, my eyesight still seemed perfectly fine. Bottom line, I put the diagnosis out of my mind and continued to live my life in ignorant bliss. My shameful and cowardly denial had essentially sealed my fate. As my eyesight continued to deteriorate, I was no longer able to deny the reality of my situation. After reconnecting with my original doctor, I was eventually referred to another specialist who went above and beyond to try and save what small amount of eyesight I still had left. As it turned out, the decision to operate on me was not one that was taken lightly, due primarily to the significant risk of causing further harm to my already very fragile optic nerves. But as the weeks went by, it became increasingly apparent no combination of laser surgery or eye drops would stop the relentless pressure buildup in my eyes. When the decision to operate was finally made, my doctor wasted no time in scheduling the surgery. Both eyes were operated on simultaneously, as this had become a race against time. I distinctly remember waking up one night shortly before the operation. I wandered despairingly into my bathroom, then knelt down in front of the porcelain throne. I literally begged a God I don't believe in not to let me go blind. To this day, I have no real understanding of who I was talking to. What I do understand is that I do not and have never believed in a personal God. Even as I begged with tears streaming down my face, I understood my suffering was very much a manifestation of my own humanity. I stared into the abyss and did not find religion staring back at me. Those months of fear and denial as I tried to run from the threat of going completely blind were some of the darkest days of my life. During that time, I wrote 2 short stories, neither of which I am particularly proud of. I cannot deny, however, they were a critical process which helped me get through my personal crisis. It would be a lot easier to forget they even exist, and I guess I could rationalize they have served their purpose and now deserve to be forgotten. Nonetheless, having completed writing my first novel, it feels like the right time to revisit and resurrect them. For better or worse, I am going to encode them as high-quality audiobooks and share them freely as an intrinsic part of my journey. What happened to me was far from unique, nor does it make me particularly special. It was, however, a profound turning point in my life, and if I am going to profess myself to be a writer, what better thing to write about than this? It's probably just my own vanity speaking. But who knows, maybe one day someone going through a similar crisis might find this story instructive. I understand now that even when you are surrounded in a blanket of darkness, it is still possible to find your way back out into the light. I am grateful for my life. I am grateful for all my blessings. Our time can be counted in the blink of a cosmic eye, so let's try our best not to waste it. Erebus stood at the edge of a frighteningly dark and seemingly bottomless pit. As far as he was able to tell, it described a geometrically perfect circle, some 20 meters in diameter. This mysterious cavern of impenetrable black was incongruently located within a beautiful garden oasis. Flanked by a graceful miniature willow tree situated at the far side of the pit, its elegantly drooping branches laden with lush flowing silken leaves swayed gently in the summer breeze. A large black crow sat near the top of the tree, head swiveling from side to side. Its beady little eyes took in the scene with an almost invasive level of shameless curiosity. A dense crop of perfectly manicured roses was located a short distance directly to the right of the pit. In order, they were colored red, green, and blue, and seemed to shine and glitter in the brilliant morning sunlight. Directly underfoot, this small slice of paradise was covered from one end to the other in a lush emerald coating of densely packed grass. As Arabin examined the circular boundary more closely, he could see how the grass changed in color, first turning to yellow, then quickly into brown before withering into black at the snarling lips of the pit. Arabin took a slow, hesitant step closer, and an all-consuming sense of overwhelming dread welled up from somewhere deep inside. Despite an impending sense of doom, he knew he needed to get much closer if he wanted to take a look into the pit's gaping maw. However, try as he might, he could not find the courage to take even one more tiny step forward.
Come closer, my lost and lonely child. It's perfectly safe, I assure you.
A hypnotic voice whispered from somewhere deep within the pit's endless depths. I'm not a child, Arabin retorted defensively.
Ah, but we are all someone's child, are we not?
The gaping maw echoed back with amused contempt, clearly evident in its beautifully sonorous voice. And exactly whose child are you? Arabin snapped back defiantly.
Not that I wish to be rude, but might I gently suggest, if you actually knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't need to be here in the first place, now would I?
Arabin pulled a face. She speaks in riddles, he muttered to himself rhetorically, and then quickly wondered if the pit had overheard him.
Well, how about this then? Why don't we try to solve this puzzle together?
The voice announced emphatically, suddenly sounding full of enthusiasm.
All you have to do is take another couple of steps closer, then take a little peek over the edge. It really couldn't be any simpler than that now, could it?
Nice try, but you do understand, don't you? Just because it's simple, it doesn't necessarily follow that it is also easy, Arabin said with the smallest hint of pride in his voice. A long, pregnant silence ensued.
Wisdom. You have wisdom, or at the very least some superficial facsimile of the real thing anyway.
The pit did not sound at all happy with this minor revelation, and Arabin felt the air become thick with deadly threat. He now somewhat desperately sought to placate the darkness from within. You know, the thought has just occurred to me that if you really want me to step closer, perhaps you should start by telling me your name.
Oh, that's easy. My name is Nixus, but my friends just call me Nix.
Arabin thought he might have heard that name before, from somewhere very long ago. However, try as he might, he could not remember from where or when. All right, Nix, tell me this. As one friend to another, are you in fact a liar? Nixus laughed melodiously, her voice echoing from within the chasm's walls.
What a silly question. If I was a liar, then surely I would tell you that I am not. So how would you know if I was telling you the truth? But all right, I'll play your childish game. I am no more of a liar than you.
Arabin's expression became pained. Yes, well, I noticed that the grass around your mouth looks dead. Was it by any chance you who did that?
Well, of course I did,
Nixus replied indignantly, a small note of accomplishment resonant in her voice.
It comes with the territory, I'm afraid to say. You really shouldn't take it personally. Now please watch closely.
As if compelled by some sort of dark, malevolent force, the willow tree began to groan and stretched towards the gaping mouth of the pit. Leaves fell from its branches, and as they were sucked into the darkened maw, they turned ashen gray before disappearing from view. The startled crow began to take flight, but a thin lashing of midnight black streaked up into the sky and snatched it out of the air. A few stray feathers hovered aimlessly in the gentle breeze.
I'm afraid it's just what I do,
Nixus said apologetically. Yes, I know all too well, Arabin replied despondently before quickly becoming aghast at his own words. I think maybe a part of me has always known. He thought very sadly to himself.
Looks like I just murdered a crow. A murder of crows, get it? Oh, never mind. It was a bad joke anyway.
Fear now inevitably gave way to unrelenting despair. Arabin took a deliberate step closer towards the mouth of the pit.
Be careful where you stand, Arabin,
Nixus cautioned urgently. Arabin cast his gaze downwards. He noted that to his left sat a small, innocuous-looking rock, and to his right, very close to his foot, lay a dead rabbit. Strange how he had not noticed it before. The elegant little beast had fur of jet black, and it lay stretched out with limbs fully extended. It looked almost as if it was in the middle of running before being viciously struck down. Perhaps somewhat disturbingly, The hapless little creature's mouth was slightly ajar, such that you could clearly see the white of its teeth.
So what do you think about that?
Nixus asked proudly. What do I think about what? Erebon replied nonchalantly, trying his level best to feign indifference.
Oh, come now. What do you think about finding your beloved pet exactly as she died all those long years ago?
Nixus fell to expectant silence as if giving Erebon time to respond, but he just continued to stare glassy-eyed at the dead rabbit.
Well, anyway, I think we both know that she suffered greatly. Just look at the way she is running, but without anywhere to actually run to. I can't help but wonder whose fault it might have been. I mean to say, it looks suspiciously like she died of toxic shock, because her owner was too lazy to make sure that she was not getting into things she should not have been getting into. Would you agree with this summary of the facts, Erebon?
Erebon hid his face with his fingers. I can't hide from the truth anymore, Nixus. You are right, of course. It was all my fault, and I should have known better. If truth be known, it was probably the least of my crimes.
No probably about it. But we all make mistakes, and God knows you have made more than your fair share. But I'll tell you what. Just kick its lifeless carcass into the pit, and I'll wash the shame of her memory from your mind forever.
Erebon was now filled with uncertainty and doubt. The real Midnight lay in a small wooden box on the mantel. Whatever this was, it wasn't really her, but rather just some kind of defilement of her beautiful memory. When he first got her, she could comfortably fit in the palm of his hand, and the docket read, 1 times livestock. But she was so much more than just that. In a moment of despairing weakness, he went to kick this painful memory into the pit, but as he did so, it instantly transformed into a livid snake, which wrapped itself tightly around his ankle and leg.
You fucking schmuck,
Nixus declared triumphantly, her voice now resonant with the call of all who had come before. Yet in an act of breathtaking defiance, Erebon pivoted to his left, and then fell to his knee, crushing the head of the snake upon the small, innocuous rock. A flash of lightning ran up through his thigh, but the snake went limp, and he easily peeled it away from his leg before quickly tossing it into the abyss.
Well, how very disappointing. Turns out you're more resourceful than I might have hoped when your back is up against the proverbial wall.
Nixus sounded distinctly nonplussed.
A word of advice, Erebon. If you want to be free of your suffering, then join me and be free. Otherwise, stop wasting my time. You are not the only lost soul in need of attending.
I think you are trying to change the subject, Nix. I still remember Midnight all too clearly. The way she died, I mean.
So you have your answer then?
Nixus replied flippantly.
But nonetheless, I did you a gentle kindness, did I not? No. Trust me, Erebon. Honesty is overrated. To take the memory of her death would be to take the memory of her life. And I strongly suspect that would have been a price too steep for you to pay.
Perhaps, but it doesn't change the fact that you are now a confirmed liar, and thus clearly not to be trusted.
All right, Erebon. Have it your own way. I'll take your reply as tacit if disappointingly belligerent agreement. Now, are you going to look into the darkness or not? Just one more step forward, and then look all the way down. Like I said, pure simplicity. There's a kind of stoic and timeless beauty in that, don't you think?
Erebon took a deep, steadying breath and then took one large step, backwards.
You fucking coward!
Nixus screamed furiously like 1,000 raging sirens.
You ignorant fool. I've been waiting here for you since the beginning of time itself, providing sanctuary to the broken and fallen. I was here when nobody else cared enough to try, and I always will be. My love is unconditional, and even the most wretched will not be turned away.
Erebon instinctively lifted his forearms to shield himself as if fending off some dangerous and unseen enemy. No, you are but an illusion born of a broken heart, and about as useful as a sundial at midnight. I see you, Nixus, and I don't need my eyes in order to do it. The sky rapidly turned to midnight black.
Well, well, well. Just look at you. Suddenly so full of life and bravado. Let's see how brave you are when you are all alone on a starless night. And believe me, every night will be starless for you, from this day onwards. The ugly truth is, you haven't even got the guts to end your own pathetic suffering.
The roses began to shrivel, and the grass beneath his feet began to die.
Do you have even the slightest notion of just how insignificant you are in the great dance of life and death eternal? Well, let me enlighten you. Your withered soul is worth next to nothing as it sits poised beneath my cloven hoof. It is only by a divine act of compassion I took the time to receive you into my kingdom. But you are simply not worthy. My doors will never be open to you ever again. Ereban indeed. I see now that your name is nothing but an ironic joke. And the joke, as it turns out, was on me.
The pit started to spiral inwards as it quickly shrunk into nothing. It left behind an untouched, pristine, grassy meadow, almost as if it had never been there to begin with, except, that is, for a small, charcoal black sundial. Ereban carefully approached the object which seemed to eat all the light around it. Upon closer inspection, no hint of a shadow could be found, despite the fact that the brilliant morning sunlight struck it at a sharp angle of attack. He cautiously touched the sundial's ashen face and was shocked to find it was so cold that it literally burnt his hand. Hurriedly pulling his hand away, Ereban looked up and caught the glint of a window. As he examined it closely, he became more and more convinced there was someone looking back down at him. He took a step forward and found himself in a darkened room, staring at the back of a man looking out of what he assumed was the very same window he had been staring at moments prior. He tried to call out, but the very air seemed to suck his voice into the void, and a sense of panic and fear started to consume his mind and body. He took a lurching step towards the figure and almost fell as his injured leg began to give way. Something terrible was about to happen, and he had to make it to the window before it was too late. Falling to his hands and knees, Ereban crawled his way forwards until he was nearly at the feet of the man in front of him. He grabbed at the man's ankles tightly, but he did not seem to notice. "Just jump," the man quietly whispered to himself. "Just jump, you fucking coward." Ereban pulled himself onto his feet, using the man's body to lever himself up. He grabbed at the man's shoulders in an attempt to pull him back, but instead almost lost his balance as he involuntarily lurched forward. He suddenly found himself standing on the ledge of the building. "I won't jump," he told himself tersely. "I won't jump, and I'm no fucking coward." But coward or not, his hands and legs began to shake badly. He had to be very careful as he climbed back over the windowsill. He felt something sharp slice into his palm before he almost tumbled face first into the darkened room beyond. Ereban, and he knew now this was not his real name, looked at his palm but was unable to resolve any detail. Colors just looked different now. Blue and black, white and gray were almost impossible to distinguish between. It had been that way for quite some time, but nevertheless, the color of red and the slickness of blood was all too evident. He began to anxiously hobble his way towards the bathroom, a sense of helpless panic welling up from somewhere deep inside. "My knee actually hurts," he thought wondrously to himself. But surely that didn't really happen. No, it didn't happen, but hurt it did anyway. Ereban reached to turn on the light but hesitated as his finger hit the switch. He liked it better when it was dark. Everything became so washed out in the light. But washed out or not, he could still see some things better when it was bright, so switch on the lights he did. Fighting to keep himself calm, he ran the water and then placed his bloodied hand underneath it. After he was satisfied that the excess blood had been washed away, he took a deep calming breath and then proceeded to wrap a small cloth around the palm of his hand. Ereban looked at himself in the mirror, which had already begun to fog. Or maybe not. It was very hard to tell the difference. He could see the darkness of his eyebrows and the shadows cast by his eyes, but all the detail was gone. It suddenly occurred to him that he had not shaved for days, and his memory told him exactly what that looked like. All those gray hairs that he could no longer see but knew everyone else still could. So should he shave simply for the vanity of it? It was such a tedious job now, so once or twice a week would have to do, and just too fucking bad what anyone else thought. But would they think he wasn't coping? The answer was still the same. It just didn't matter what they thought. Ereban thought back to shortly after the pandemic, when hell had ascended from below. So many mistakes, mistake layered upon mistake. Blame enough to go around, his angelic specialist had gently tried to tell him, but in the end he had to take responsibility for his own failures, which could really only be described as legion. Just human, he whispered to himself with a sense of profound disappointment. Just human after all. He had told his people as much many times over, but had he ever really believed it himself? After making so many fuck-ups, perhaps it was time to be a little more forgiving of others. And after all, there was surely more than enough suffering to go around as it was. No need to add to the pile by holding on to futile, petty, little hatreds. Erebon let out another long, slow sigh, then stared at his reflection in the mirror. My wings are gone forever, and my world has never felt so small, he thought to himself bitterly. But as he looked again at his reflection, he was shocked to see one of the most beautiful faces he had surely ever seen, as clear as if his eyes had been remade unbroken. Nixus, he whispered in silent disbelief, statement and question combined. Although she remained as silent as a cold winter's morning, he felt helplessly bewitched by her sightless eyes made of midnight mother of pearl. As he fought to resist her siren call, finally he understood what was missing. Despite her beauty, she was the manifest absence of love. Summoning up all his remaining courage, Erebon spoke softly to the mirror. I know who you are, so there's no longer any reason for you to stay. Tell the fallen that I still love them, and think of them every day. Nixus slowly shrunk backwards into the silvered glass until only his own indistinct and blurry reflection remained. He was happy to notice that despite everything he had been through, he could still see his own smile. Erebon heard an all-too-familiar chime and earnestly fished his smartphone out from the depths of his pocket. He clumsily stabbed at the messaging app and pressed Select to speak. We are having tacos tonight. Would you like me to bring you some over? Erebon was just about to dictate a reply, but something made him pause. For the first 2 weeks after the operation, he had lived in a world of perpetual shadow. But through the love and kindness of his beautiful neighbor, he had found just enough strength to hold on. This had not turned out to be the life he had planned, but he could still feel the sun on his face, and for that he would be eternally grateful. By way of modest celebration, he carefully put on his reading glasses and very slowly pecked out a reply. Sounds wonderful.